In recent American history, there have been many examples of debate and diplomacy within our nation, both successful and unsuccessful. A very common form of domestic diplomacy are standoffs and hostage situations. Arguably the most famous standoff or hostage situation in American history is the Waco siege, when a conflict between a religious cult and the United States government captivated the nation. Today is February 28, 1993. In Waco, Texas, federal law enforcement are exacting a raid upon the Branch Davidians. Many of the deaths that occurred due to the events in Waco, Texas could have been prevented if the FBI and ATF had taken different courses of action. The cult began in 1929, founded by a man named Victor Hutev. Victor was a Bulgarian immigrant and started his own faction of the Seventh-day Adventist Church after his removal that same year.
After his death, Hutev's wife assumed control of the group. A man named Benjamin Roden formed a splinter group from Hutev's group, known as the Branch Davidians. After his death, Roden's wife took control of the church. After gaining her trust, a man named David Koresh then assumed control of the group and led it at the time of the siege.
Late May of 1992 was the official start of the investigation on David Koresh and the rest of the Branch Davidians. The ATF declared this case as the potential of a volatile group in the possession of large amounts of weapons and explosives. Special Agent David Aguilera of the ATF opened this investigation and became the official leader/moderator of this team. December 4th, 1992. A meeting was organized by Chuck Sarabin, the Assistant Special Agent in charge of tactical planning, and the goal was to discuss possibilities of actions upon the compound. Aguilera informed the planners about his ongoing investigation and discussed his findings. There were around 75 people in the compound, including women and children. January 11th, 1993. The ATF put together an undercover house across from the front entrance of the compound. The house gave agents a clear view of the front of the compound and was equipped with basic surveillance equipment. Special Agent Robert Rodriguez was made the figurehead of this house and mainly served to gain more information from the Branch Davidians themselves. On January 28th, the ATF was able to gain inside access to the compound after a conversation with Koresh outside the compound. Rodriguez pretended to be a resident of Waco County. He was invited to come inside for Bible study and came back many more times up until the raid took place. Rodriguez was able to gain several pieces of key information, including the overall layout of the compound, and also learned that the majority of Koresh's weapons were unregistered.
The finalized raid plan made by the ATF is as follows.
Approximately 75 ATF agents would arrive at the compound at 10 o'clock. Coming 10 miles from Texas State Technical College, which was used as a temporary home base for communication. The agents moved in cattle trailers, common on the roads of Texas, to avoid detection from any person in the compound. Along with the ATF agents, the trailers carried 3 arrest support teams, whose responsibility was to handle prisoners and secure a perimeter. The undercover house was given the task to report any changed conditions of the compound on raid day. February 28th. Raid day. The first crucial part of the raid occurred around the same time of this meeting, and it is when Rodriguez entered the compound to see if Koresh and his men had taken arms or reinforced security in any way. Agent Rodriguez then attends the scheduled Bible study for the day, when Koresh enters the room with an agitated look on his face. Rodriguez goes over to him and asks if something is amiss. He responds, "Neither the ATF nor the National Guard will ever get me. They got me once and they'll never get me again." The Branch Davidians knew that a raid was coming. Rodriguez makes an effort to quickly report back to his company leader, Jim Kavanaugh, of the impending news. Kavanaugh, not having the authority to alter the game plan, informed Rodriguez to report this news to Sarabin. Sarabin, being at the command post, heard the news quite quickly, and without a moment to hesitate, Sarabin decided that the raid must continue. This decision turns out to be a critical error, as the upcoming entry by the agents strays far from the envisioned plan. The raid team arrives on schedule, and the cattle trailers with the agents inside enter the driveway with no visible activity going on, in, or outside the compound. As agents began exiting their assigned vehicles, Koresh stepped outside the front entrance of the compound and said, "What's going on?" ATF agents spoke back whilst identifying themselves. Koresh retreated back into the compound. Immediately after Koresh shut the door behind him, gunfire erupted from every window and opening in the front of the compound. The agents in front of the compound had no choice but to remain in a covered position until the heavy gunfire finally let up after 90 minutes of shooting. Throughout the fight, several ATF agents were badly injured, and 4 passed away after sustaining lethal gunshot wounds. A considerable amount of time passed before James Kavanaugh, the current head position of the undercover house, help prevent further chaos. He took matters into his own hands and contacted the compound's landline. It took Kavanaugh several minutes to achieve a ceasefire.
The FBI decided to step in and handle the incident themselves, as they believe their expertise better fits the task at hand. Over the next 50 days, constant negotiations are attempted by the FBI in the attempt to cause surrendering of Koresh and the rest of the Branch Davidians.
On April 19th, the FBI decided to send tear gas into the compound in order to attempt to force the Davidians out. Sometime during the FBI's attempts to remove the Davidians from the compound, a fire had been set from inside. A massive blaze in just a matter of minutes, and before anyone knew it, the entire Branch Davidian compound was on fire. Very few people were able to escape the blaze, as the wind and new holes in the building allowed for the flame to spread. Soon, 76 people were dead inside the compound, including many women and children. The siege had ended in a sudden turn of events. All that was left, hours later, was the ruins of the compound. Bodies would be discovered over the coming weeks, months, and years.
The raid that occurred on February 28th happened very differently from the way the ATF expected it. The endless amount of gunfire by the Davidians was unexpected, but it could have been predicted through more evidence gathering by the undercover team. The ATF did not pursue or attempt any other entry options besides a dynamic one. They did not acknowledge less risky alternatives and did not recognize the fact that they were at a massive disadvantage when attacking the compound. Although it was stated by the undercover team that Koresh rarely ever left the compound, this theory was never tested by Rodriguez or any of the other undercover agents. In general, the undercover house was regularly monitored, and the directions for the evidence the planners were supposed to gather was very unclear. A man named Ishimoto, a member of the Planning Commission, stated that the organization of the undercover house and its activities was marked by no clear chain of command or direction of their actions. The initial ATF raid was, to say the least, extremely unsuccessful. The Davidians were both aware and prepared for the first raid, and were easily able to counter the ATF. The ATF had many opportunities and reasons to call off the initial raid, but they never did. The Davidians really wanted this conflict. Koresh's teachings had indoctrinated them into believing that this was their calling. Koresh himself said, "If the Bible is true, then I'm Christ. But so what? Look at 2,000 years ago. What's so great about being Christ? A man nailed to the cross, a man of sorrow acquainted with grief. You know, being Christ ain't nothing."
Similar to the initial siege, the second siege was poorly planned and extremely unsuccessful. The FBI was not prepared for the very worst and should have communicated much better with local authorities the day of the event. An article by the Austin American-Statesman has an interview with Byron Sage, the lead FBI negotiator during the standoff. In the interview, Sage said that he thought the biggest problem the FBI had was internal. He said, "We brought it on ourselves. We created a crisis within a crisis."
Along with this, the perception of David Koresh and the rest of the Branch Davidians was made out to be just another cult made up of dangerous and untrustworthy people. This idea contributed to the court's decision to allow such a raid to be executed in the first place. This event could be seen as an overreach by the government and what government aggression can lead to. The FBI were also ignorant of Koresh's values, as negotiators began ignoring his Adventist teachings and began labeling them Bible babble.
The U.S. government wasn't fully informed about the Davidians. The FBI took matters into their own hands and failed. Author Dick J. Reeves stated that the Davidians were exactly what you'd expect them to be if you knew their theology and had done any research beforehand. But if the FBI had known what they were all about before they started, they would never have done the raid, he says. It was a botched deal. The FBI has since reformed the way it deals with standoffs. The FBI's lack of preparation before the raid led to their misdiagnosis of the danger with the Branch Davidians. Waco gave right-wing anti-government extremists justification for their beliefs and enabled them to spread their ideas to more and more people. They saw Waco as the U.S. government violating the Second Amendment to take advantage of their people. This rise in anti-government sentiment from Waco would reach its climax on April 19, 1995. On the anniversary of the burning of the Waco compound, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, who were associated with this anti-government movement, bombed the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, killing 168 people.
Anti-government ideas through the U.S. for years to come. The Waco event allowed activists to try and prove what they believed because of the tragedy and mistakes made at Mount Carmel.
Is the FBI directly responsible for the tragedy that occurred? No. At the end of the day, the Davidians were the ones that burnt down their own compound, and their radical faith was what led to their eventual demise. But was the outcome of this standoff preventable? Absolutely. The FBI could have taken several steps in different directions to avoid this outcome, and should have seen something like this coming. However, it is much easier to say this with hindsight. The lessons learned from the standoff are necessary to prevent the next Waco, and will continue to be till the next life change.